takes about 60 years for the ark to go from this area in Shiloh. So we have some battles then that it goes from Shiloh, as we read in 1 Samuel chapter 4, verses 17 and 18. That's when Eli died. And you look at the legend and see, you can't really tell, but you see the dashed red lines. That's where the Israelites were moving the ark. So they moved it from Shiloh to Ebenezer. And of course, it's in Ebenezer right here that the Philistines won the battle and they took over. You can see when it moves then from the area here of Ebenezer on down. Now the Philistines are transporting down to Ashdod. Then it goes over to Gath and then to Ekron. The Philistines were having so much trouble. We remember the story about Dagon and how they put the Ark of the Covenant in with the the Philistine god of Dagon. The next morning, there's a stump lying on the floor there, broken to pieces because of the ark there being by so the Philistines finally just said, we don't want to have any more to do with it. They said, we just need to get rid of it. They knew it was bringing bad luck. So then the Israelites then start transporting the Ark of the Covenant, and we're going to see tonight. So it goes then. Finally, after 7 months, the Philistines returned it to the Israelite territory. They pulled it with a cart and a new cart and 2 cows into the city of Beth Shemesh. And this area right in here, Beth Shemesh, and they just left it there. Then the men of Kiriath Jearim, we're going to find out Kiriath Jearim, which is an area right here. Yeah. But it's right there. Is also named Baal Judah. And so the Israelites then had taken over. The men of Kiriath Jearim came and took the ark and brought it to the house of Abinadab on a hill there, and they consecrated it and left it there. So as I said, this was only about 7 miles from Jerusalem. So now as we look at the Ark of the Covenant, this is what it was all about. This is what was so sacred. This is what represented God. And we see all of the cherubim on the top there. Mercy seat, that's where God was. We see the poles there, how it was to be carried by only the Levite. And then the contents, as we look at the contents of the ark, we see there are the tables of stone, the unbroken 10 commandments that they carried inside it with them, which represented to them the covenant between God and Israel. They also had a pot, a gold pot with manna that we remember that was the food that God provided to the Israelites to keep them alive and to keep them aware of their dependence on God. And then the third thing that we see is Aaron's rod. As you look at it, and we see how in one night that rod blossomed, and then it changed. And basically it just went from the blossoms then to the second stage, and finally then to it says it sprouted bud. Here we go, the process of nature. It sprouted buds, it blossomed, and it grew grapes all in one night. The purpose for this rod, Aaron's rod being there, was to remind them that Aaron, the priest came from the tribe of Levi, and this priesthood there. So that was the Levitical priesthood was the purpose for that. So this piece of furniture was very important to the people and very important to God, of course. So now we're getting ready for them to bring the ark from Kiriath Jearim or Baal, Judah, to Jerusalem. David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, about 30,000, says. He arose and he went with the people who were with him at Baal, Judah there, to bring up there the ark of God, which is called by the name of God, the ark, the very name of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned above the cherubim. But we see here, and then as we read in 1 Chronicles chapter 13, David consulted with the commanders of thousands and hundreds of every leader. He said to all the assembly, "It seems good to you and from the Lord our God, let us send abroad to our brothers who remain in all the lands of Israel, as well as the priests and the Levites in the cities that they have pasture lands, that they may be gathered to us. And then we will bring the ark of our God to us. For we do not seek it in the day, we did not seek it in the days of Saul." Remember, it had just been deserted and left there. So then all of the people agree. So now David, then as it talks about in 1 Chronicles chapter 13, he assembled all the people from the Nile of the Egypt to bring the ark of God. He went up to Balaam. He just made a big tour, getting people together so that they could bring the ark. Now, we're going to notice, remember I told you, when the Philistines transported the ark, they put it on a new cart. They had 2 bulls there, 2 cows with them to pull it. And so David does the same thing as we read in 2 Samuel chapter 6. And they carried the ark on a new cart, and they brought it before the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah, where we have the 2 sons of Abinadab, remember it was at his house is where it was kept for that time. It says then that Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart with the ark of God, and Ahio went before the ark. And David and all the house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines, castanets and cymbals. And then things go terribly wrong. Why? Because David did a lot of homework. He did a lot of organizing and advertising the movement of the ark, but he didn't do research into the way that God had always required the ark to be transported. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah put out his hands to the ark of God to take hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there beside the ark of God. It also reminds us of another time with the ark of God, as we read in 1 Samuel chapter 6, how 70 men who just looked on the ark. As you notice, the ark is not covered. That was another. They always covered the ark so the people couldn't look on it, see it. So that was another problem. But these 70 men died because they looked on the ark. Now, as we look at David's reaction, and David is looking at verses 8 through 11. David was angry. And David was angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah, and that the place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. David was afraid of the Lord that day, and he said, "How can the ark of the covenant come to me?" So David was not willing to take the ark to the Lord and into the city of David. But David took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite, and the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom for 3 months. And the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. So now we see that David was angry. Well, why was he angry? Well, he was misunderstood. I think from David's perspective, he thought, I'm trying to do something good for the Lord. I'm trying to move the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem. It had not been in Jerusalem, but he said, I want to bring back worship to the Lord, and this Ark of the Covenant is an essential part of the worship. So he's thinking, I tried to do what was right, but his motives may have been right, but he did the wrong thing. Also, he was humiliated. You can imagine 30,000 or more people there. He had this big event that he had announced, that he had publicized, that everybody was looking forward to, and now we have a dead man, Uzzah, there lying on the ground. So David does better, as David did so many times. The difference between Saul and David was when Saul did wrong, Saul just continued doing wrong. He didn't try to right his wrongs. He didn't try to follow and learn what God wanted him to do. He didn't have the heart of David. So now we're going to look at transporting the ark God's way as we look at verses 12, starting with verse 12. Now King Saul was told, the Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God. So then David learns about it, and he's thinking, well, he's being blessed with this dangerous ark that we just had a man killed over, so it must not be the ark. It must be another problem. And if we were to just read 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 12 and 13, we would be totally misled because we would think that David did the same thing the second time. As we read this, it says, so David went and brought the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And when those who had bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fatted cat, an animal. We don't get the details of what really happened until we go to the book of 1 Chronicles. 1 Chronicles chapter 15, verse 2. Here's what now. Here's David giving instructions to the people. No one but the Levites may carry the ark of God, because the Lord chose them to carry the ark of the Lord and to minister before him forever. This is the way it was carried Jordan River way back when. So then David now instructs the Levites, because you did not carry it the first time. Now I'm reading 1 Chronicles chapter 15, verses 13 through 15. He says, because you did not carry it the first time, the Lord our God broke out against us, because we did not seek him according to the rule. God's rule is so important. So the priest and the Levites consecrated themselves. They prepared themselves before they started to carry the ark, to bring the ark to bring up the ark of the Lord, the God of Israel. And the Levites carried the ark of God on their shoulders, as you can see in this picture. See them there in the proper attire, carrying with the poles. They were instructed through the rings as they were on their shoulders with the poles, and as Moses had commanded, according to the word of God. This time David makes sure that God's will is the way it's done. It's interesting that now they're rejoicing, and they had just had an aborted mission that killed someone, but now they have the confidence now that they know they're doing the way the Lord wants it. So, as we see here, we see David says, and David danced before the Lord with all his might. He was wearing a linen ephod. This is going to be something that will be interesting in a few minutes. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the horn. So then the next thing, remember where the ark was to reside, and that was in the tabernacle. Of course, they didn't have the tabernacle from previous where it was before. Everything had been separated. So then we see that David then, and you can see that he has on there the priestly ephod and priestly garment there. So then the important thing is that David brings the ark, and you see how it's covered up there. That's the correct way, not to be seen. So they're going into the tabernacle, which David has provided, to reinstate the worship the way that God had meant for it to be. So as we read verse 17 there, the first part of it, into the tent that David had pitched for it. Now then, we're going to go to the next part of this event, and this that was so important now. David has just become king. He's selected Jerusalem as the major place. He has gone and got the Ark of Covenant. He has brought it into the tabernacle, and now he's going to worship God. Going to bring back the worship to God, a man after God's own heart, as we read verses 17 through 19. And they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings, fellowship offerings before the Lord after he had finished sacrificing the burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. He blessed the people in the name of the Lord Almighty. And he gave a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins to each person in the whole crowd, both men and women. And all the people went to their homes. So we're going to see that David brought back the worship. This is the process. Yes, he had a glitch along the way. He corrected his mistakes. He followed through. He then brought worship back to God. And now the Israelites were united. I left out one verse. Verse 16. So if we go back to verse 16, we're going to see as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out the window and saw David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. Despised as baza is to disdain, to hold in contempt, to accord little worth to something. When David comes home and he's happy in the Lord, ready to share his joy with his family, he's met by the rebuke from a wife. So then as we continue reading in verse 20, and David returned to bless his household, but Michal and the daughter of Saul came out to meet David and said, how the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants, female servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. And all the commentaries that I read about this explanation of uncovering himself, about vulgar attire, all of this. All of the commentaries said, as we read, that David was dressed in the ephod, in the priestly garment, because he was focused on worship to God. Here, the commentaries said what Michal, her comment referred to the fact, instead of being the king with his royal robe and all of his attire out marching in front of the ark, she said that he was being just like a commoner and that he was not dressed. He didn't have his robe on. So she was criticizing him. There's no reference to any kind of vulgar or indecent clothing or anything. It was just her misrepresenting actually what happened. So now as we look at David's answer to her, as we see that basically in verse 21, and David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above all his house, to appoint me as prince over Israel. People of the Lord and I will celebrate before the Lord." So he says, hey, God chose me over your father. I'm doing this because I'm respecting God. I'm worshiping God. I'm focused on God. The second thing is he talks about how he isn't afraid to humble himself before the Lord. He chooses humility over pride. There, Michal was thinking about, you're the king. You should be you should be demonstrating to them and expecting them to show you the respect instead of giving God the glory, instead of showing God all of what he deserves. Then as we look at the priority of worship, David defends his act of worship as not for anyone's benefit, but for God. And that's what our worship is all about. When we start thinking about ourselves, when we start focusing on ourselves, and our worship is distracted from our focus, our honor and our praise to God, then we fall into the same situation that Michal here was trying to put David in. And here, as David said, it was before the Lord, I will celebrate before the Lord. So you see that God sees David's heart. As we look at the discipleship lessons from tonight, we first see seeking God's way. That's what it's all about for us. Read his word, learn what we're to do, find out what he instructs to do. Have this heart of David, seeking God's way. Did he make mistakes? Yes. Larry Jones in his lesson Sunday night, The Young at Heart, we were talking about being comforted, and he used the heart of David in his the reference to the book of Acts and the heart of David. I know when Andrew was talking Sunday morning, and this is a very big thing now with us, the Madison congregation now. Ronnie prayed for it, and as we're looking for more men, additional shepherds to lead the flock here, we know it starts with prayer. Each of us hopefully listen to the Made for Mondays, that we are praying for the process. You will be hearing more about the process, and you will be hearing more about the timeline before long. Right now, we introduced just the idea, and we're asking, it begins with prayer, and it will end with prayer. And this heart You know, as Andrew was talking about shepherds, and that's what it's all about. It's all about the heart. It's all about our love and concern for each one of you as part of the Baptist flock here, as part of the congregation. And it's all about the people. When you look at all the characteristics and you analyze them and you try to figure them out, and what does that mean, and how does that apply, or what does it really require? And Ronnie, I'm sure will agree, it is all about the people and the love and the care and as we talked about, the protection, the presence, the protection, and what was the third one? That's something for us to look at, but I should have done my homework. But yes, the 3 P's that Andrew talked about, you'll hear it again, all 3 of them. But so then we look at the desire to worship. That's what David was focused on. He wanted to reinstate worship as a part of this Israel nation. That's what it was all about. These tribes and God and the 12 tribes of Israel. Then we look at bitterness and despising as we saw the relationship. We saw how Michal responded to David reinstating the worship. She's focused on herself, on him, and she's focused horizontally on people. So then as we look at the key verse, David arose and went with all the people who were with him to bring up the ark of God. That was the beginning of the lesson. That was his purpose. That was his objective in this lesson. Then, as we look at the last one, they brought the ark in its place inside the tent, and they pitched it there, and they offered the burnt offerings, the peace offerings before the Lord. So we're about to finish up tonight. Next week, I'll also be teaching the lesson, and we're going to be reading 2 Samuel chapter 7. We did chapter 6 tonight. Next week is going to be a very interesting, another short lesson from just the verses, but such a powerful lesson, because this is, and we think about David and we think about his highs and lows. Think about in tonight's lesson. He had the highs, then he had the lows as he thinks, Uzzah just died and I'm responsible for it. He was responsible for the death of a man, but then he gets highs. Next week, he's going to think that he's going to build the temple. Nathan's going to say, I think you're the man. Get all excited about it. And then the very same day, to be told by God, you're not the man. Not the man. But the promises that God made to David, and the way that he elevated him, and he is the type of Christ. As we think about so many common things about David that were about Christ, the Messiah is coming. David prepared the way for the coming of Christ. I think I just finished next week's lesson, but we'll thank you so much for being here, and I made it with y'all's help. Appreciate it so much. Have a great rest of the week. Love y'all. Appreciate you very much.